I've read that actually you began your career as a reviewer of television and movies, and so I'm curious how you transitioned into writing books.
Sure. Well, in the year '91, I got out of college, and my first gig was working for the Village Voice. And my job was working in the book section, answering phones, and I was the office assistant. But the great thing about being at that paper at that time was that if you just hang around, you can get an assignment from one person, and then that leads to another assignment. So the first piece I wrote was no one else wanted to do it, so it was a consideration of the final episodes of Who's the Boss and Growing Pains, those two seminal 80s TV shows. But that led to other work, and soon I was writing book reviews and movie reviews and music reviews. And that was my apprenticeship. I learned how to write for different editors who have different expectations. I learned how to sit down and write for 5 hours and get an article out. And eventually, just after a couple of years, I became confident enough, because I was making a living at it, to start writing fiction.
And so was it always the goal to be an author of fiction?
Writing in some sort of capacity, and then as a kid, I read a lot of comic books and science fiction. I thought, I'll write science fiction or fantasy novels, and then I knew eventually I would get back to that. And once I did enough journalism, I felt I was ready to start writing fiction.
So does your experience as a person who has reviewed literature affect your writing today?
Well, I think, I was always a careful reader. I think there's a critical lens that I use in thinking about pop culture, which sometimes crops up in my books. But there is some overlap, but generally they're two different things.
And your latest book is autobiographical in nature, in somewhat, you've said. So how do you borrow that from your real life? What elements do you borrow, and what do you choose to leave out?
Well, you try to figure out what's going to work. My book Sag Harbor takes place in the summer of 1985, and my summer of '85 was really boring. So how do I make it interesting? I have a situation, the town of Sag Harbor in Long Island, but what can I borrow from what I experienced, my friends experienced, what works, what's going to serve the novel, not serve the novel, and that takes a lot of inventing. So, I was drawing from a certain sort of bare bones bit of my biography. In order to actually make it compelling fiction, you have to make up a lot of stuff.
I'm sure. And we've talked to many authors today about what advice they would give college students who want to follow in the same career path. And so you having that apprenticeship, can you tell me maybe what you would advise a college student to do if they want to do the same thing?
I would just say keep going. You'll get a lot of rejection and disappointment. You're going to write some stuff that's pretty terrible. But next time it might be a little better. And the time after that, a little more better. So keep going. There'll be a lot of setbacks, but each time you add another sentence to your mountain of words, you get a little better.
And do you have a team that works with you to review chapter by chapter as you're writing, or do you do it pretty much independently? I'm
pretty independent, but with Sag Harbor, I would send chapter by chapter to my agent, just for sort of pat in the back, like I'm not crazy. But generally, I just power through. When I'm done, show it to people.
And lastly, since you mentioned your agent, how did you go about finding your agent, or did they find you?
Well, I'm on my second agent. My first one I met through people at the Village Voice. They had agents, and so they recommended me. But when my first attempt at writing a novel failed, I was dumped by my agent. So, and that sort of taught me, people might not understand you, but keep going. Eventually, hopefully they will. So when I finished The Intuitionist, my first book that got published, I was sort of very patient and tried to find the right person. And luckily, when I sent it to Nicola Raji, my current agent, she understood it, and it turned out differently this time. Well, certainly. I'm glad it's a match that fits. So thank you so much for your time. Sure, my pleasure. Thank you.